another Wanda Jacket tutorial, and this time we are going to learn how to sew the cuffs. The first thing you need to do is take your pattern and make sure that you've marked all of your notches and your dots on the sleeve facing pieces. These sleeve facing pieces will be attached right sides together, and then they'll be turned to the inside of the jacket. Then the cuff will be turned back. This will make more sense as we go on. I'm using a little awl there to make a hole and then push my pin through. You can also make the hole in the pattern before you attach it to the fabric. The tiny little hole that it makes will really not disrupt the fabric's weaves, but if you're using a fabric that's super wiggly, you want to check that first. You can see that I've interfaced my pieces, and now I'm matching right sides together, matching my notches and pinning. On the side that doesn't have a mark for the dot, you're going to make a regular seam using the 5/8 inch seam allowance. After that's stitched, you're going to press the seams open. You also need to clip the seam so that you'll be able to get that curve to be nice and flat. Now you're going to match right sides together. Match those notches right there that meet, and then pin it until the dot. If you notice, the other side has only one notch and the other piece doesn't have a notch that matches it up to. That shows you that that single notch matches to the sleeve itself, not to the facing. So those two notches go together and you pin it there to the dot. And then you're going to sew from the edge there until the dot using 5/8 inch seam allowance, and you're going to stop at the dot. This is what that looks like when done. You're going to press that open as well. You can see there the single notch and the side with no notch in them. Now you're going to turn under 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the unnotched edge. Turn your jacket sleeve wrong side out. You're going to get your scissors and you're going to clip right there at the end of that seam where the dot is to the seam allowance. You're creating this sort of a wing here so that that seam allowance can easily get flipped, and your seam of attaching the sleeve facing will be a lot easier for you to do without bulk. Now turn it right side out again, and you can see the little wing that it creates there. It's sort of like a hinge. Take your sleeve facing that you just made and match those notches together. Grab your pins and you're going to match the corners, the notches, all the way around. Make sure that they lay together nice and flush, because that's really important for this step. When you get to that little hinge that you made right there, be very careful where you pin it, so you make sure that those seams match exactly to where they line up. If you line them up exactly to each other, there shouldn't be any sort of puckering when you sew the sleeve facing to the sleeve. If your seam allowance doesn't quite match, it's okay. It's more important that you match those two seams together so they lay nice and flat. Now match your underarm seam, right sides together obviously, and now ease that into each other. You may find that when you have your interfacing to one piece, like right here is with the sleeve facing, the regular body of the sleeve may behave differently. It's okay, you just want to make sure that you ease them in together so you don't get any really strange bubbling or bumps. Now there's a vision of that again. You're going to go all the way around, and then you're going to turn that corner and go down and stop at that hinge again. Once it's sewn, you can see it looks like this. Now take your scissors and clip those corners so that it makes a nice point. And now I'm going to grade my seam allowance down so it's not too bulky where it's turned. Grading means that I'm making one seam allowance about half the width of the other one. There we go. Now turn that right side out. And be careful with those corners. You can use a knitting needle or a turning tool, something to make them lay nice and flat. And with my fingers, I'm easing it around so that that seam lays nice. Then you're going to press that, and now you're going to match the seams together both the underarm seam and the join. And you're going to ease in the facing to the sleeve so they lay nice and flat. My fabric is kind of drapey, so I had to be very careful to work it with my hands so that one wasn't fighting the other. Now get your needle and thread, and I'm going to finish this by hand because I find that the finish looks nicer than by machine. So I'm just going to do a little sort of a whip stitch and carefully grab just a tiny little bit of the sleeve and a tiny little bit of the facing piece. This means that you're only going to see the slightest bit of thread from the outside, and since this is a two-tone weave, I can use this ivory thread and you're never going to see it. Of course, if you're using a fabric that is all one color, you're going to want to match your thread as closely as possible to your fabric. Here's a close-up so you can see me stitching it. I'm only grabbing a couple threads of the sleeve, and that means you're only going to see a tiny little prick on the right side. This is what it looks like when done on the wrong side, and then I flip it out to the right side, and that's what it looks like. You turn your cuff back like this. You can see that neat little notch that we have. That's it. Join me next time where we're going to talk about the waistband. You can grab this pattern on Wearing History on Etsy, also on Wearing History Clothing. Thanks for watching.